Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
Hey, welcome to the Grove. I am Brett. Sorry about that. I don't know where we are. I am Vince. Welcome to the Town Church. We are going through the book of Nehemiah, so if you have a Bible, turn there, or in your device, turn there to Nehemiah. If you don't have a Bible, there should be some in the pew in front of you, or at least near you, so you can grab one of those. If you don't own a Bible, or don't have access to anything electronic that may have something like a Bible on it, then we would love to give that to you. Consider it a late birthday gift or early Christmas gift. That's yours. We want you to take it, and we want you to read it. So that's where we are. All right, Nehemiah chapter 5. Over the last weeks, we've been talking about the rebuilding of the wall around the city of God, around Jerusalem. The city that Nehemiah had come back to needed to be restored, and it began with the protection of the city, with a giant wall around it. And so we learned last week that even in the midst of the rebuilding, the people had to protect themselves. You remember that scene? They were protecting themselves from the enemy with a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other. That was my attempt to hopefully make me manly, and that hasn't worked so far. So we'll keep trying other things. Nehemiah was driving his people hard. He was driving his people hard to get this wall rebuilt. Many of them worked through the night. Many of them never changed their clothes. Right, that's an artist's dream right there, right? Working through the night, never changing your clothes. And so that's the way Nehemiah was driving them. This is the Christian community working together and working hard. Tonight, we begin to see some internal problems. Some internal problems in the city. Because there was injustice happening. There was oppression happening. Last week we saw the opposition from the enemies of God. This week what we're going to see is injustice or oppression from the people of God. Now here's the real question for me. As I think about this, my question is, how do we work toward fighting against injustices that we see around us? How should we respond to those things around us that we see as oppressive? How should we live as a people when others around us are not being treated as they should? That's a dilemma for me. I go back and forth and I battle with that. If there's someone poor in our community, how should we respond? If there's someone who's being treated unfairly, how should we respond? How should we live among them? How should we live around them? When I returned from Sudan, I was in Sudan a couple years ago. A lot of you know that. We made some decisions as a family to minimize our expenses, to minimize our possessions. But even in the midst of that, even when we did that, I had to check my heart, because even in some of that, there's some sinful leanings. Some sinful leanings in the direction of this, so that I can say, or so at least that I can think, well, I don't have to do anything now. I don't have to act in any way. I don't have to help others because I'm just like them. Right? I've gotten rid of my stuff. I'm just like them. So now I don't actually have to act. And so there were some sinful leanings there for sure. But my question is for us is how do we respond when we see people who have been oppressed, when we see people who have faced some sort of injustice? As humans, we're all created in the image of God. We're all image bearers of God. You've maybe heard that. We all have pieces in us that mirror God's heart, right? Everyone. Whether you're a church-going Christian with a suit and tie, or a pagan, a Jesus-hating pagan who listens to country music. Wherever you fit on that spectrum, we all have to think about the fact and know and truly understand the truth that we are all created in the image of God. Bits and pieces of God's heart flowing through us. Part of that shows itself in how we care for and stand up for those who are in need, whether that be physical, whether that be mental, whether that be emotional, whether that be financial. Whatever it is, we have been built with a built-in desire, a built-in system that stands against injustice and oppression. Now, we see that from Jesus. Jesus taught us to love one another, and some of that is built into us as humans. Now, I'm not a big fan of Christmas music in general, right? I got into our car this afternoon, and someone had driven our car before me, and and blaring in the vehicle was Christmas music. I think it was like Aaron Neville and Mariah Carey or something. It was horrible. I'm not a big fan of Christian music, but over the last few days I've been... what'd I say, Christian? Both stand true. Hear me, you write that down. There should be a blank on your notes there for that. So I don't like country music, I don't like Christian music, and I don't like Christmas music, all right? All the C's of music. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of Christmas music, but a song that's been going through my mind recently, a song that has hit my mind, there's a line in it, it's "O Holy Night" is the song. And it says, one of the lines says, "Truly he taught us to love one another." Speaking of Jesus, truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. Is that true? Absolutely. It's absolutely true. We look forward to a day where oppression will cease. And shouldn't we be working toward that now, right? If that's what we're looking forward to, shouldn't we as Christians be working toward what Jesus has taught us even now? So tonight, in and through Nehemiah, we see God's heart toward those who have been oppressed. We see Nehemiah's response, we see Nehemiah's example, and we learn from him about how we are a part of seeing this city restored by helping those, standing up for those who are being treated poorly. All right, that's the heart of it all, right? Humanity is God's favored creation. We're the only image bearers of God. You'll never meet a cat who has his or her interest toward anyone other than itself. Right? Have you ever met a cat that has come up to you and said, "What can I do to serve you today?" No, absolutely. They scratch you and run. That's all they're good for, right? And they do things inside that they shouldn't. And so the humanity is the only thing that is created in the image of God. When we stand up for God's image bearers, we're standing up for those who are nearest to God. How do we learn from Nehemiah tonight? Well, the first thing we learn is in chapter 5, so look there. We see the injustice explained. What is the injustice that's going on here? Let's read and find out what's happening. Chapter 5, verse 1, here's what it says. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers, for there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. There were also those who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of your brothers, our children are as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. Now that's the oppression, that's the injustice that's being served. We see three different groups of people as we work through those 5 verses, being treated less than image bearers of God. Now the real devastation in all of this is in verse 1, where we're told there was a great outcry of the people against their Jewish brothers. The oppression was internal. Right? It was coming from their own people. This wasn't opposition from the outside. It was coming from within. Now, what are those 3 groups? First, we see in verse 2 that it says that we have big families. We don't have enough food to eat. And so there's the first group. We're not told why they don't have enough food to eat. We're simply told they don't have enough food to eat. Right? And I can tell you firsthand, with some firsthand experience, that it takes a lot of food and a lot of money to feed a big family. And so there are big families who don't have enough food to eat. Second group we see in verse 3. This group owns land. They have land, and so to some extent they could farm and eat what they produce, but they don't have grain to eat, so they're selling their land to get money to buy grain. Does that make sense? They have land. They could farm, right, and grow food to eat, but they don't have enough money right now to buy food to give them what they need to work. It's like the gift of the Magi. I'm going to botch this completely because it's been years since I've read that. Do you remember that, when the guy had to sell his pocket watch so that he could buy his wife the hair thing, and she cut her hair so that she could buy him a partridge. That's right. And so that's what we see here. They need food, but to grow food they need to have strength, and they don't have the strength because they don't have the food to eat currently. The third group we see in verse 4. This group is oppressed in that they are having to borrow money at high interest to pay a tax for the produce that's coming from their own fields and vineyards. All right? That's crazy. They are paying a high tax from the stuff that they are growing, so they don't have enough money to eat. In all of these cases, here's what I want us to hear from all that. In all of these cases, a simple daily need is being withheld from these people. Do you see that? Food. A simple daily need is being withheld. It's not an injustice, right? That the people are wanting Escalades and all they can afford is Suburbans, right? It's not an injustice that they're wanting the new iPhone 4, but they can only afford the 3GS. That's not the injustice. The injustice is that they're being withheld from them a daily need, the daily need of food. Now hear this. God created us in His image. Kids, does God need to eat? No. Right? Do we need to eat? Yes. Right? We are unlike God in that. In part, God made us to need something that He would provide for us so that we could then rely on Him. And these people are being withheld from them is one of their daily needs. So what do? Now this is sick. Right? This is sick. Parents, if you've thought of doing this, it's not a great idea. But here's what happens. The people sell their children into slavery. That people sell their children into slavery to get money to then buy grain so that they can eat and then get their fields going again. Now here's what's even more sick than that, if that's possible. Verse 5 tells us that the daughters have already been enslaved. Now the wording that's used here, even though it doesn't come out, it is sexual. The daughters are being sold into that kind of slavery so that they can get something that they need daily. The daily necessities of life are being withheld from these people. And the hope of these people, the hope of these families is that they would sell their children. All right, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. The hope is that they would be able to sell their children, get enough money to pay off debt, get their farms up to speed in production so that they could then purchase their children back. That's an injustice. That's oppression, right? These same kinds of things, to small extent and to large extent, are happening on so many levels today. People are being treated poorly right and left. There are needs probably within our own body that we could be helping if we knew about them. Right? It's very probable that we don't know about them because those in need have the same history we have of knowing it's every man for himself. And that's wrong. So here's the corrective. We need to get to a place of honesty within our own body that we can express our needs. And I'll tell you this, we won't get there. We won't get to that place until we're able to be a body that cares for the needs of others. All right? There are people in this room probably right now who are hurting financially, emotionally, physically, whatever it is. How do we know that? By investing in, here we go again, Vince, by investing in deep relationships and sharing in one another's difficulties. All right, when we hear that someone doesn't have a place to live, what is our first response? How can I put a bunch of boxes in that room so I can say, I don't have an extra room, sorry. Right? What's our first response when we hear that someone has a need, a place to live? When someone can't pay their electric bill, what is our response? Right? Not phone bill. Right? You don't need to play Angry Birds. But what is our response when we hear that someone cannot pay their electric bill? Now, what was Nehemiah's response? Look at verse 6. I was very angry when I heard their outcry in these words. I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. And I said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. And I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. But you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. Return to them this day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them. Then they said, we will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them swear to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, as every good Baptist would say, amen, and praise the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. And so we see here in Nehemiah's response, response to the injustice that's going on. At least three things, right? The ABCs of Nehemiah's response. We see anger, we see that he brought charges, and we see correction. Look at anger. Nehemiah was angry about the injustice. We see that in verse 6. He was angry that these people had been treated so poorly. Shouldn't we be angry about that? Shouldn't we be angry about injustice? I'll tell you this, even in our anger against injustice, we're bearing the image of God, aren't we? We're bearing the image of God. We see this from Jesus in the New Testament, in Mark chapter 3. He meets a man in the synagogue with a withered hand. Do you remember that? A crippled, disabled hand. And he goes toward him, and the Pharisees around Jesus are sitting off in the corner like a bunch of cowards, watching Jesus to see what's going to happen. They're trying to catch him working on the Sabbath. Do you remember that story? And Jesus looks at them and he says, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill it?" I love this. The Pharisees didn't speak. We're told that Jesus looked at them with anger and was grieved by their hard hearts. Now, isn't that an appropriate response? Isn't that where we should be when we hear of someone who has been treated poorly? When there's an opportunity to do good, anger is an appropriate response. Anger toward the sin of injustice. That's the A. The B, brought charges. He brought charges. He rebuked them. What did that lead to for Nehemiah? He brings charges against the nobles and the officials, the uppities. He brought charges against them because they were charging extremely high interest and allowing the selling of their own people into slavery. Now think about this. What have the people been trying to avoid for years and years and years and years? They came out of Egypt as slaves, right? God told them, if you keep worshiping foreign idols, you're going to be slaves. They've been fighting against this for years and years and years, and now their own people are taking them in as slaves. And so Nehemiah brings charges. He rebukes the officials who were mistreating God's people. See, correction. Nehemiah's third response after anger and rebuke was correcting the people. Right? He calls for correction in three ways. He says, stop charging crazy high interest on these people. And then he says, second, return their fields to them right now, today. Do it today. And then third, he says, not just their fields, but any money you've been charging them, give it back. Right, Nehemiah is angered and he rebukes the officials and calls them to correction. And I think this is beautiful. We're told that the officials do as Nehemiah asked them. And to ramp that up a notch, Nehemiah asks the priest to swear that the people will do it. And then as a gesture, a prophetic gesture, he shakes out his robe and he says, just like you will be shaken from God's people. And so we see rebuke and we see correction as part of what Nehemiah works toward. And what do the people do? We see this in verse 13. They obey and then they worship. They obey and then they worship. Think about this. When we truly desire to honor and follow God, we see rebuke and correction as part of life because it's something that draws us to obedience and draws us to worship. I wonder if that's us. I wonder if that's us. If we would be at a place where we could say to someone in this group, in this room, if we could say to someone, hey, here's something that I've noticed of you. Here's an issue in your life. In fact, I'll even call it a sin. Here is a sin in your life that you need to stop. You need to obey God and do what He commands. You're living a life of willful disobedience against a holy God. How do we respond to that? Do we obey and worship? If you're anything like me, you begin to think of defenses, right? Well, this is why I did that. You don't understand my life. The people in Nehemiah chapter 5 obey and then they worship God. You want to know what the most significant issue was in this entire chapter? The most significant thing in this entire chapter for the people was their witness to the city around them, to the nations around them, the people who were not believers. Do we know that? Do we sense that same thing? The ways in which we act say a lot about us to the people around us, to the people outside of the believing community. In verse 9, we see Nehemiah say, "The thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations on our enemies?" Now, do you see what he's saying? He's saying, shouldn't you live in a way that shows your honor of God so that the people looking in will see him and not your stupidity? So we have to understand that the world is looking in at how we treat one another and how we treat the city around us. They're looking for reasons to taunt us, point out our stupidity, call us hypocrites. Isn't that what the Pharisees were doing in Mark chapter 3 to Jesus? They're standing off in the corner, looking, waiting for him to do something so that they could call him on it. When we allow our people to be mistreated, when we allow the ones that are outside of our small group to be mistreated, the people in Fort Collins, the world is looking in, waiting to belittle us, and in so doing, belittle and dishonor the name of God. And I wonder, for us, for me, do we realize that? Do we get that? The unbelieving world around us desires the same things God desires because we're all created in his image. When we, his people, act in ways that are not consistent with the ways that even unbelievers treat people, we're dishonoring God. We're not restoring the city, but we're actually destroying the city, destroying our witness to the city. The city's looking in, hopefully taking its cues from us, but they smell injustice, don't they? They're looking for that, waiting to catch us in that. So what do? We need an example. Let's look at Nehemiah's example in chapter 5, verse 14. Look at verse 14. Here's Nehemiah's example. Here's what we see. He says, "Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now, what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this, I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Remember my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people." Now, what do we see of Nehemiah and his example? He's not just correcting the people. He's not just bringing charges to them. He's not just angered by them. He's actually an example. He's living it out. He says, I was governor for 12 years, and I could have eaten from the food, from the allowance of the governor. Right? Now, the governor in that day was given a pretty hefty food allowance. But where did that money come from? It came from the governor taxing the people at a really high rate so that he could eat well. And Nehemiah said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And he says later that there were 150 people at my table. That's a large table. Or we have a table that seats 10. 150 people sitting, eating. And what does Nehemiah do? He provides at his expense all of the food. 1 ox, 6 choice city sheep. Oh wait, doesn't say choice city. 6 choice sheep. Some birds and all kinds of wine in abundance were served. Wine for 150 people at his expense. He says, I paid for it. I didn't use the governor's allowance. Why? Because his people were in need. They were being mistreated and didn't have the daily necessities of food. There was no way in the world that Nehemiah was going to feast while his people were working hard on the wall and being mistreated at the same time. And so Nehemiah rebukes and corrects the people, but he's living out his message. Now this is huge for us as we think about applying this, as we think about how we're involved in the lives of other people, both in this church and beyond. We need to think about our example. Are we actually doing what we're calling others to do, what we're talking about? Do we speak against or tweet against the injustices and do nothing about it? All right. If we're going to be in a place of opening our mouths about what we believe is right, then we also need to put that into action. If we say we want to see the city restored, we actually put that into action. We've talked about a city restored for weeks and weeks and weeks now. What are we doing to now put this into action? James, the brother of Jesus, says in a letter that he wrote, he says that pure religion, true religion, religion that is pure before God is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. Right? To care for those who are not being cared for in their affliction. We cannot, as a church, be people who says they care about the things God cares about, the things that are pure in God's eyes, and then not put that into practice by actually caring for the orphans and the widows, those who are uncared for. We must do what we're actually saying. Now, why did Nehemiah do all of these things? All right, we just read through the things that he did. On the surface, when I read this, on the surface, what it looks like to me is that Nehemiah is a bit conceited. That Nehemiah is bragging about the things that he has done. But if you look closely at verse 15, we're going to close it out here. At verse 15, we're told that the former governors before him laid heavy burdens on the people, treated them poorly, worked them way too hard, and took their daily allotment of food and their money. But I did not do that because of my fear of God. Because of my fear of God. Now, Nehemiah had a love for those created in God's image and a fear of God. He had a love for God and a love for man. You remember that story in Luke chapter 10 where a lawyer comes to Jesus and asks, what do I need to do to have eternal life? What do I need to do to be saved? Jesus turns it back on him and he says, well, what does the law say? And the lawyer says, and he gets it right, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. It's the right answer, right? It's exactly what we see of Nehemiah in chapter 5. We see a love of God, a healthy, respectful fear and reverence of a holy God. And we see Nehemiah loving others as himself. And I would argue better than he loves himself. And so the lawyer back in Luke chapter 10 tries to be clever and he says to Jesus, fine, but who is my neighbor? You remember that bit? says, well, who's my neighbor? Do you remember how Jesus answers that question? By telling a story. He tells a story that we call the Good Samaritan. And the story goes like this. A man is walking down a road and he is beaten. Right? He is stripped naked and he is thrown down and left for dead on the side of the road. Who comes by? A priest comes by. And he keeps walking. And then a Levite comes by. Two people that we've seen in Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah, right? A priest and a Levite come by. They don't help him. Right? Two very respected followers of God. And then a Samaritan, an enemy, walks by and has compassion on the man. He cares for the man. He provides ongoing care for the man. Gives up his own money for this man that's laying there left for dead. And Jesus asks the lawyer, who thinks he's clever, thinks he's got his act together. He says to this lawyer, so who was the neighbor? And the shocking answer is the Samaritan. The one who should be at odds with this person. The most unlikely person. Jesus points to this and says, this is the point, that loving God and loving our neighbors may involve loving those who are unthinkable. To some extent, unthinkable. Those we would never have compassion on. And so as we live this out, or if our desire is to live out the gospel, we've got to be different than the world around us. We've got to have compassion on those who have been consistently shoved aside. Who is that? I'm not talking about people groups, right? I'm not talking about homeless or the orphans or widows. I'm not talking about that necessarily. Who is it in our lives who is consistently shoved aside, treated poorly? Who is that person in your mind, in your life, where you would rather not deal with? You'd rather someone else deal with. As we think about the restoration of the city of Fort Collins, who is it that needs the love of God shown toward them in ways that point to the gospel of Jesus? In caring for, in loving, in having compassion on these people, whoever that is, we are mirroring the gospel. Ever thought about that? We are showing people the gospel. We are mirroring the very picture of what the gospel is. Paul says in Romans 5 that God shows his love for us when we got our act together. No, he says God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Here's what I want us to hear. When we extend a hand of love towards someone who is unlovely, we mirror the very same gospel that has been applied and effective in our own lives. Have you thought about it that way? When we extend a hand of care towards someone who is in need, someone who has been oppressed, we are actually showing, mirroring the very same thing we have gotten from God, the gospel applied to our own lives. So how do we do this in our community? How do we do this in our city? I think the answer is something we already know. By responding in ways that stand up for, care for those in need, all the while pointing them to their ultimate need in Jesus. Pointing them to their need and our need in Jesus. In his name, all oppression will cease. And so for us to live this out, we're mirroring the gospel in how we treat others. This shows our need for Jesus, other need others' need for Jesus as well. So here's my prayer for us. Let me finish this out. My prayer for us, all of us, as we think about the city, as we think about how we move forward now in working against the injustices and the oppression in the city and in the people that are around us who are down and out, who need care. My prayer for us is that we would both bear the image of God while we bear the image of the truth of the gospel. Because we're image bearers, and so we bear that already, and then we bear the truth of the gospel with that. That's my prayer as we move forward. So let me pray for us tonight, and we're going to finish by celebrating what Jesus has done for us. Let me pray. Father, as we think about this text that's actually kind of difficult to read through, think through, where people are being treated in ways that are horribly unjust, and people are being forced to do things that they wouldn't normally do. It's hard to read that stuff, Father, but it's in your word for a reason. You want us to know about you and about how we should then respond in reference to how we know you. And so we look at examples like Nehemiah, who cared for the people, who fought for the people who were being oppressed. We look at our greatest example of Jesus, who both cared for those who were being oppressed, but ultimately, we see Jesus as one who gave up everything for a people who should be oppressed. Father, you have a desire to see the city restored. You have a desire to see us restored to you. And God, we need your help to know how to move forward in some of these things. How do we help people around us who are in need of care? God, we need your help. And so tonight, I ask for wisdom for us. And God, I ask that you would break our hearts for the people around us who need your care, who need to know the truth of the gospel, just like we need to know the truth of the gospel. Help us, Father, to mirror the gospel in how we live and how we speak. Amen.